Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I am back with a Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 3 prediction video. I'm going to go into deep detail based on the trailer, and based on some plot points, and predict what we can really expect to see in this upcoming episode, and what will happen in the Battle for Winterfell. And firstly, I want to talk about the Night King, and the overarching theme of this episode. And in terms of the Night King, I can see three potential possibilities. First of all, this grand battle happens, all of our favorite characters band together, and they actually kill the Night King and defeat the army of the dead. I'm immediately just going to say it, I don't think this is going to happen, so I'm not going to waste any time on it. The army of the dead has been a threat since the first episode of Season 1, and I don't think that this episode is going to discredit all of that plot that's been developed over the past 8 seasons. And secondly, based on Episode 2 really learning and seeing these characters interact for the final time, I do not think Episode 3 is meant to be a triumphant episode. I think the Night King will win, because he's survived a war for the Dawn before. And I think our characters will be knocked back on their heels. They'll lose countless of their friends, and in their eyes, all hope will be lost. And in terms of the Night King's strategy, I think there are two potential possibilities. The Night King could be at Winterfell. He could attack Winterfell, and he could win. This makes sense because we haven't seen a White Walker attack without the Night King's involvement. He has always accompanied his army. So at this point, there's no reason to believe why the Night King would abandon his army. But that being said, before he didn't have a dragon. And the Night King has proven he's not just a killing machine. He is a character that has a mission, that has a purpose, and has a motivation. We've seen that in all the spiral symbols that he leaves. And we've seen that in the actions that he's taken. So I think it's equal opportunity that the Night King doesn't go to Winterfell. He instead flanks and goes to King's Landing. The key hint here is that we do not see the Night King in any of the promotional material. And secondly, if the Night King stayed in Winterfell, there's almost a finality to it. If the Night King instead flanked and went to King's Landing, it would create a conflict to the south, where he could kill the 20,000 men Cersei brought from Essos. And that would be another threat that our characters would have to face after leaving Winterfell. And the Night King going to King's Landing does have some proof. In Season 4, Bran sees a dragon. That could be the Night King, because he doesn't want to face Daenerys and her 2 dragons, and he doesn't want to make himself vulnerable. And he always has his eyes on Bran, and he knows that that was a part of the plan. And based on the House of the Undying, we know that King's Landing is basically destroyed. So strategically it makes sense. My one key issue with this theory, however, is it really degrades Cersei's character. How could Cersei possibly survive a Night King attack? And I do not think Cersei's been left for all this time just to be killed by the Night King. So for that reason, I'm not willing to say if the Night King attacks Winterfell or attacks King's Landing, but I'm going to make a bet that he is not defeated in this episode. And because of that, I think the Battle for Winterfell will go a very specific way. It'll take place in many different locations in Winterfell. And we'll see our characters slowly be pushed back by the dead, to the point where they can't fight any longer. But firstly, I think the focus of this episode is going to start outside of the walls of Winterfell. We're going to see Jon and Daenerys standing on a mountaintop looking at the threat that is coming for them. This is probably just after Jon told Daenerys that he was the child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. I think both of these characters fly their dragon to this spot, they look at the army of the dead coming, and based on their plan, it's a perfect place to wait. Because if the Night King gets drawn in to the Godswood, Daenerys and Jon would be able to quickly respond.
We need to be near him. Not too near or the Night King won't come, but close enough to pursue him when he does.
But I feel like a lot will happen and they'll be forced to fight. Because as we've seen, the White Walkers are prepared. We usually see the Night King travel in packs of 4. But in this case, we see countless White Walkers. As far as the line goes, there are White Walkers. It's impossible to say how many there are. And one thing we know from Season 6 is every one you kill, all of the Whites that they've resurrected die. So I think that's a way that they could help thin out the White Walker threat and how they could possibly stand a chance against the White Walkers. But the beginning parts of this episode are going to focus on our characters and the armies outside of Winterfell. They are positioned strategically to help keep the Whites and White Walkers at bay and hopefully give Bran a chance to lure the Night King to him, to have Jon, Daenerys, or Theon kill him. And this is going to be hard to watch because all of our favorite characters that we've seen establish and grow in the last episode are going to be fighting on the front lines. It will seem almost impossible for them to live. And first we have Brienne. We know that Brienne is holding off the left flank. And here we can clearly see that she's fighting with the Vale, but more importantly, she's fighting with Podrick as well as Jaime Lannister. But then we have other people on the battlefield. we saw a lot of development between Missandei and Grey Worm. And we know that Grey Worm is going to lead the Unsullied. And they're taking front lines, front and center in the middle of Winterfell. And this is the most important part because the Unsullied are really great at holding off anything. They have shields, they can stand their ground. And it makes sense to have them in the center because they can defend the artillery that is used to take out the Whites. And in front of the Unsullied, we have the Dothraki. They are savages that are known to fight in the fields. And they'll be able to clear out a significant portion of the White Walker army before they reach the Unsullied and the other armies. But then probably on the right flank, we're going to have Jorah Mormont. And he's going to be holding his ground with probably Lady Mormont. And they're going to be leading the Stark armies. We saw that Jorah was fighting with Lady Mormont to try and get her to stay in the crypt, and she refused. So we'll see if Lady Mormont will be able to fend off the White Walker army. And then we also see the same preparation inside the castle. We see Sam standing amongst Winterfell watching everyone prepare for battle. It'll be interesting to see if Sam fights in the battlements of Winterfell or if he's going to go back in the crypts. I think Sam's made it pretty clear he is not useless and he was the first guy to defeat a White Walker. So I think we will see Sam fighting in Winterfell, much like we see him fight during the battle at the wall. We also see Sansa and Arya looking over the wall, anticipating the White Walkers. I bet as soon as the threat becomes serious, Sansa is going to go in the crypts and Arya is going to stay and defend her home. We also see Davos stand and take his place. And he has a very important role. He's in charge of controlling the archers, as well as in charge of lighting the trench. He needs to see where the White Walker army is, and light the trench accordingly, because they are very heavily armed. Not only do they have battlements that are covered in dragon glass, they also have a trench that is dug that will catch fire to build a barrier between Winterfell and the Whites. And I'm sure while everyone's preparing for battle, we will get a glimpse of the crypts of Winterfell. And in there we're going to see Varys, Gilly, Little Sam, and Tyrion's going to be in there also. There's also a new little girl that's been developed with a scar on her face who wanted to fight alongside the people of Winterfell, and she will also be in the crypts. And on top of that, I know Sansa will accompany them when the White Walkers attack. So I'm sure we'll get a lot of great scenes with these characters while war is being waged in Winterfell. But then I'm sure after some character moments, the battle will start. The White Walkers will march in to attack Winterfell. And we know that there is so many, so they're going to be swarming all of our characters at once. And it's going to be chaos. And the White Walkers is such a big army, over 100,000 men. They're going to completely surround everyone. Brienne, Jaime, and Podrick are going to ready their army to fend them off on the left flank. We're going to see the Unsullied protect and defend the artillery while they're shooting at the incoming Whites. We're going to see the Dothraki running forward and thinning out the crowd, while we're going to see Jorah and Lady Mormont defend and hold their own with the Northerners. And I think there'll be some point of desperation where Jon and Daenerys will have to step into action. We see in this shot Daenerys is riding her dragon. She'll be useful to fend off the army. And if the Night King was there, the dragons would be useful to fend him off. If not, then the dragons will be useful to fend off the Whites to protect their armies. And I think Jon will ride Rhaegar to a point, but we see that he's off fighting with everyone else. And while I think Daenerys is going to stay on her dragon, I think Jon is a different story. I think we could see him with Rhaegar thinning out the crowd, but much like he has in every other battle, he fights along his people. However, in this case, I don't think Jon fights outside of Winterfell. And as the battle gets worse, we see that the storms get worse. The Unsullied start blockading the Winterfell walls, and we start seeing more smoke and more flames, which could come from the dragon fire and the artillery. But ultimately, I think all the characters are going to have to retreat back into Winterfell. I think on the left flank, we're going to follow Jaime, Brienne, and Pod as they run back into the Winterfell gates and retreat to defend the walls. I think Grey Worm won't make it, and I think his tragedy was that he wasn't able to find the life he wanted with Missandei. I think in terms of the Mormonts, I think Jorah will survive. I think he's needed for more episodes. However, I think it would be a huge tragedy if Lady Mormont didn't make it. And I believe these characters will make it into Winterfell just in time before the gates close, and Winterfell tries to shut themselves out from the White Walker threat. And while I think a lot of key characters are going to make it back into Winterfell, there's going to be a lot of characters who are left outside of the walls to be killed by the incoming Whites. And then at this point of the episode, the battle outside of the walls of Winterfell is over. Now they're trying to hold Winterfell as a castle. And a key component of defending Winterfell is the Godswood. That is the backbone of their whole plan and how they're going to lure in the Night King. I don't think this is going to go according to plan. I think that Theon and Bran are going to have a good moment together, and Bran is going to say this.
Everything you did brought you where you are now.
where you belong. Home. And we see Theon here with a bow and arrow defending Bran much like he did last time in Season 1. But much like how the Whites are now attacking Winterfell, I think they're going to start barricading the walls, and defending the Godswood is going to be very hard for Theon to do on his own. And I think this is where Jon comes into place. I think he will fly straight into the Godswood and fight and fend off the Whites to protect his brother Bran. And we see many shots of Jon that are shocked. He's running, and I think he could be running inside the Godswood as it's being overrun by Whites. And I think that this shot is key. There is not a single tree within a pretty fair distance from Winterfell. I think the reason why Jon looks so emotional and broken is because Bran is probably dead, and I think the weirwood tree has been destroyed. And you can see the remnants of the weirwood tree behind him. And I think Jon losing Bran and also losing Theon could really give us a sense of loss and a sense of how could we possibly defeat the White Walkers and the Night King. And I think in that desperation, Daenerys is going to use Drogon and try and thin out the crowd, and it could start a fire at Winterfell. And then we see all the characters who have retreated into Winterfell defending it as it's in flames. We see Jaime on the battlements of Winterfell screaming orders. And I think that's Podrick just behind him. And I think this shot here is of Brienne, still holding her own and holding the walls before they're breached by the Whites. We also see Arya using the staff that Gendry made for her, and she's holding her own. And in this chaos, we also see Beric yelling at the Hound. And this is a huge thing the Hound is going to have to overcome because he's afraid of fire. And I believe much like how these characters were pushed back into the gates of Winterfell, they'll only be able to hold the walls for so long, so they'll have to retreat. And I think we're going to get into more of a psychological warfare type deal. And I think that goes right into this scene with Arya. Arya is terrified, and I think it's because she's finally seeing people that she knows and loves who are fighting and are Whites and are coming to get her. It could be the Hound, it could be Gendry, it could be somebody who's resurrected that she is afraid of fighting. But one thing I will say about the Hound is he probably will survive because the Lord of Light sees something important for him to do. Unless we see the Hound do that in this episode. And I think at this point, Winterfell is completely engulfed in flames and Arya is making a mad dash to the crypts of Winterfell. If you notice, she doesn't have her staff. She lost it. And now all she has is a dagger of dragonglass. And I think the remaining characters are going to make a dash to the crypts of Winterfell to rescue the remaining people in the crypts. And I think at this point our characters have accepted that they lost. Winterfell's on fire, and part of the reason why it could be on fire is because Jon and Daenerys want to make a distraction for the White Walkers. They want to keep them at bay, and they want to burn all of their own dead so they aren't resurrected as White Walkers. I think while Winterfell burns and the White Walkers are held at bay, I think they'll sneak into the crypts of Winterfell and possibly find a secret entrance to escape. I think the first option is that Jon and Daenerys could use their 2 dragons to rescue the very few people who survived Winterfell. Or they could all escape through a secret passageway and walk, and hop on a boat and go to either the Iron Islands or Dragonstone, which we've seen hints of in this shot here of Jon and Daenerys. Or to be honest with you, I wouldn't be so shocked as to see the Fiery Hand. We know that Melisandre went to Essos for a reason, and Melisandre knows that there is going to be a fight at Winterfell, and that the army of the dead are coming. What if, like in the Battle of the Bastards when the Vale arrived, we're going to have a scene where the Fiery Hand, the army of the Lord of Light, are going to come with their flaming swords and help fight against the White Walkers. The army wouldn't be enough to let them win, but it would be enough to be a distraction and get them enough time to escape Winterfell. So I think in this episode, like all the character development we built in episode 2 is really going to pay off in this episode. We are going to see a lot of characters die. And like I said, I don't think this episode is meant to be triumphant. I think they're going to lose, and they're going to lose bad. And it will leave everyone really curious as to how they will defeat the Night King as well as Cersei. But all in all, I think our characters in the field, the majority of them are going to make it and retreat to the walls of Winterfell. When Winterfell catches on fire, they will have to retreat. So I think that this episode is going to be the brand new Red Wedding. And I think it's going to show us some things that we're not even expecting. I think a lot of characters are going to die, and I think it's going to leave us in awe and in shock. And we won't even know what to expect for the last 3 episodes. But that's how I feel about this episode. Please let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.